Hello everyone. In this part of the tutorial series, we're going to use Maya to create our base mesh that will eventually take into ZBrush to sculpt in high poly detail. So with that being said, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do before I even get into Maya is I'm actually going to gather some reference. So I've done that already, but all I did was go on the internet and find some reference that I think is going to aid me in every phase of the pipeline. So in the middle, you can see this is the concept I created, but it's not very detailed. So what I did is I pulled a reference that's going to help me determine what kind of art style I'm going to go for. And once I determine the art style, I'm going to be able to figure out, okay, if it's stylized, what do I need to do in the sculpting phase, the modeling phase, and the texturing phase to achieve that kind of style. So these are all important things you should be thinking about. Usually realistic, it's kind of easier to grab the reference, right? Because you're creating stuff that's realistic. So you're going to get real world images to understand the shape of that object, what kind of level you need to sculpt in there, what kind of detail you need to sculpt in there, and then obviously what is it going to look like in the textures and materials to get it that realistic look. With stylized, it's a bit trickier because there's so many different styles of stylized that it can be hard to see, like, okay, what's kind of the level of detail I need to model in my model? What's the level of detail I need to sculpt in my sculpt? What's the level of detail I need to texture, put in my textures, right? So I just gathered these references because I think they're going to help me. I'm going for a stylized look, not realistic and not super cartoony, somewhere in between. But I know some things to look out for is I kind of like these more simplified textures. Maybe I'll add a little bit more higher frequency detail in my textures to break things up. I really like these chiseled edges. I'm going to probably highlight the edges in my texture. And maybe we'll even play with the emissive channel, and I'll do some cool, like, runes or something on there. I think that could be fun. So that's super important for any project you do, is you pull up reference and you get a good idea of what you're aiming for. I will say I just whipped these 3 reference images up pretty quick because this is a relatively simple object. But when you're doing more complicated things, you probably want a lot more reference. And even this one, I could probably gather even more reference to really help me define, like, okay, what's the art style I'm going for? I need some more examples for the kind of style I need to sculpt and the kind of detail I need in my textures. So reference is super important. So once we have reference, we can jump into Maya. And even before we jump into Maya, I do have this image here that I sketched out, since this is an original concept and it was in perspective. I just sketched this out and I was like, oh, this is pretty close. Because having this in Maya is sometimes nice to have as a guide, as a reference image plane, so you can use that as a guide, and you're not just completely eyeballing the blackout phase, right? So in Maya, I want to import that reference image plane that I created in Photoshop. To do that, I'm going to hit the spacebar, go to my front orthographic viewport, and hit spacebar again to bring that up. I'll hit this icon right here, image plane, and I'll navigate to where I saved that in here. And we have our reference image plane. So I want to make sure, it looks like my center is not quite aligned at the center point, so I'll just shift it over, kind of eyeball it a little bit. It doesn't need to be precise. Again, this is just to aid us when we're creating our block out. So yeah, now that I have that, I can hit spacebar, and I'll go back to my perspective, and I'll bump it up. And I'll kind of set this up. So I'll call this one grave, something just easy to name. Just name it something easy. Then I'll go to my channel box layer editor, and I'll hit, with my reference image plane selected, I'll hit this icon, which will create a new layer and add that selection to this layer. So if I toggle the visibility on and off, you can see what it's doing. and we'll call this one reference layer. And another cool feature and a benefit to do this is if I toggle this third box to R, I can't accidentally select my reference in the scene, thus I can't accidentally move it. All right. So now we're ready to create the blockout of our tombstone. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a box, a cube, and just use the simplest of simple modeling techniques and move my edges, my verts, and my faces to align it to this reference. So something I do notice is my reference is kind of fighting in space with my cube. So I want to keep my cube centered, just in case I need some symmetrical detail, but it should be fine. But a good practice would be to just take this and I'll select in the outliner and push it back. Okay, but obviously when we go back to our front orthographic view, it's fine. It still lines up because it's orthographic. So now what I can do is I can take this and I can use my polygon modeling techniques to line this up as best I can. Something I could do is I could cut this half and only model half. But you can see I'm doing a different approach. I'm selecting the vertices on each half and scaling them to get that shape. Let's so give it a little bit of thickness. And again, I do have my reference on my other screen, this guy, just so I can kind of make sure I'm not messing it up. So something I didn't think about when I pulled these edges out is I'm kind of, if I'm looking at the top view, I'm splitting it out this way, but this is in 3D space, so I should have probably splayed it out this way as well. This is going to make it more interesting too. So this is probably, maybe it's not splayed out that much, but it should be splayed out a little bit more. Okay, so this is going to be the base. Let's go ahead and create another cube. And this will be kind of the overall shape of the tombstone. Let's do this. If we need to be able to see through here, we can enable X-ray mode. So that's this icon right here. Let's do this. So again, I want this to be slightly stylized. So instead of having it straight up and down like this, I do want it to kind of splay out as it gets closer to the top. Okay, and that's the simplest I can do, is start with a cube. That's as much detail as I can model in at this point. So now I'm going to have to start extruding and cutting in edges to get more topology. So that top piece, I had it selected, hit Control E to extrude. And let's just bring this all the way up here. So now I need more topology so I can start defining that shape more. If I select this edge and then hold shift and select a parallel edge, it does a ring selection. And what I can do with that ring selection is I can go to my modeling toolkit, hit connect, and by default it will put an edge in the middle, so I'll hit enter. And now I can start playing with these. So I can already tell I'm going to need more resolution to kind of get this place to curve. To get this to curve along the top. So I'll use my insert edge loop tool. And a cool trick, if we want this to be straight, is we can scale it in the axis that we want it straight. And we can do something like this. So let's get one here and one here. And let's go ahead and scale it. And scale it. This one I'm being a little bit careful with. Okay. And I'm going to throw one right here as well. And right here. So if we wanted to, we could probably like, and it's always good to check in perspective too. We could maybe take these in a little bit. I don't know if I want this one in. I'm going to undo that. Move this one up and go back to our ortho and just scale it back. Okay, so that's kind of nicely blocked out. So the next thing I want to do is block out this part. And I think we're getting good shapes overall. Yeah, let's create a new cube and we'll start blocking out this piece. So now I have to start thinking about the depth. Maybe we will scale this in a smidge and push it back to make room for this piece. And maybe we can even scale this a little bit bigger and push these back a little bit. Okay. This is pretty much going to be pretty easy, so I'll scale it. Like so. Vertex mode, select the top 4, move them up. And I do want it to kind of splay out too to give it a more stylized feel. Maybe that's too much. We'll be subtle with it. That's good. Should try to follow the kind of this edge right here, right? So yeah, I think that's good enough. And this is pretty much as simple as we can do. So you would want to make sure this is good. I would consider this kind of like the blocking out phase. I think this is solid. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use subdivision modeling techniques to basically round off some of these edges and control how sharp or how soft those edges are. But even before we do that, this is pretty Maya specific. What I want to do is delete the history and freeze the transforms on my kind of blockout meshes. So I'll go to my channel box editor and select this object. You can see I have some values set here. So for whatever reason, I accidentally moved these and I need to get back to this default position. I would have to remember these values. So this is why it's helpful to freeze the transforms, and then you can see Maya keeps track in this input section in our channel box of all these functions that we did. So sometimes it can bog down the system if you're splitting the mesh into different objects or combining multiple objects. Your outliner, you'll notice, get messy, and so that's when you'd want to delete history. So typically sometimes I'll wait till the end to delete history freeze transforms, but I think it's a good thing to show you guys right now. So I'm going to do that. I have them docked here, but by default, we can go to edit, delete by type, and history. And if we need to freeze transforms, we go to modify, freeze transforms. And so once I hit freeze transforms, notice how it zeroes out this this move, rotation, and scale this translate, rotation, and scale values. It zeroes them out. Obviously, scale is going to just set it to 1 because 0, it's non-existent. But it basically makes that the default position, rotation, and scaling. So I'm just going to do that for all my other objects. And I should name these, but I think we're good for now. Oops, so I deleted the history on that one. So let me undo. So now I want to show you guys what deleting the history does. So you notice how I have all these inputs and I delete the history. It just cleans that up for me. So sometimes if you run into issues, I always suggest, and I can do multiple objects at once. I was just kind of showing it on a 1x1 base, but I'm going to select everything, delete history, and freeze transforms. So everything is zeroed out. So now let's actually get into subdivision modeling. So real quick, just let's look at the very basic, the fundamentals of subdivision modeling. And the reason why we do want to subdivide it is because in ZBrush, we're going to need to subdivide it anyway to sculpt in finer detail. So if I hit 3 on the keyboard, you can see it's basically smoothing our object. So this is called smooth preview. And if I hit 1, that will take me back to my low res, my regular kind of cage. So what I'm going to do to showcase this is if I use my insert edge loop tool, you can see how this is being held sharper than this one. So essentially what we want to do is for this edge loop that runs on our corner, you basically want to edge on either side of it to control how sharp or how soft that is. So if I just double click this and hit 3 key and just move it, you can see how we can play with the sharpness of the curve. So if I bring it like really close, 5, that's what it's doing. And then even more, like, technically this edge is looking all the way over here. So not only are we throwing this here to hold this one, but like every edge is just looking at the next edge in the loop system or the ring system to see how far it is away from each other, and that will dictate how sharp and how smooth it is. So that's why, like, even here, it's like we're seeing it smooth right here. But if I were to put an edge loop right here, you can see how that's holding that negatively. We wouldn't want that. So I'm going to undo. And for this example, if I use my insert edge loop tool and kind of put something right here, you can see it's like not necessarily at this end, but it is starting to hold that a little bit better. Not better, more sharply than if we didn't have it there. So sometimes, and for our purposes, we'll keep it really simple, but doing more advanced models and stuff, you'll have not only your main holding edges, but you might have something like these for your supporting holding edges. It just depends on what you're modeling and how sharp you need it and whatnot. But we're going to keep it simple for our purposes. So those are the basic techniques. It's the basic technique that we'll utilize moving forward on this model to create the subdivision. All right, so let's go ahead and get into that. Real quick, too, I do want to mention in Maya, I'll see this a lot with new Maya users, is if we have this edge loop and we just hit delete, maybe we don't need it anymore. In Maya, you actually want to hit Control Delete, because just hitting like delete or backspace, if I go to vertex mode, it leaves these vertices behind. And what that's doing, I refer to these as lonely verts, but what it's really doing is it's converting, or it's not converting, it's making all these polygons n-gons. And when we model, especially when you're doing subdivision modeling, you want to maintain all quads. Tris are okay in some cases, as long as they're utilized correctly. And then n-gons we pretty much do not want. Another thing to keep in mind when you do that is if I use my insert edge loop tool and I try to put like a holding edge on this side, Well, the insert edge loop tool only likes it when the adjacent polygons are quads. And a quad is a polygon with 4 sides. A tri is a polygon with 3 sides. And an n-gon is anything with 5 or more vertices. And so, really, it's not going to work for us anymore because all these are n-gons. So I'm going to undo. So Control Z, or just Z in Maya. Control Z is just habit. And I'm going to Control backspace. And now when I go to vertex mode, you can see I'm not leaving the vertices behind when I delete those edges. So now I can use my insert edge loop tool and put it in nicely. All right, let's implement some of these practices into our model to create some nice beveled edges. So I think the first thing I'm going to do, the easiest thing, is I can throw an edge here. And notice how it's not in the middle. If I want it to be in the middle, my method is to do a ring selection. So if I select one, hold shift, select a another edge in the ring selection and just double click it, it will select that whole ring of loops. And then I can use the connect function and hit enter, and I know that's perfectly in the center. The multi-cut tool is also handy because you can not only cut things, but you can throw edges in the middle pretty easily. But I'll just keep it simple with using connect. So another thing about subdivision modeling is the reason why I threw this here is because you still want the polygon sizes to be roughly the same distance, like if from each other. So I don't want it to, like, this holding edge and this holding edge to, like, rely on that much space. I think having this edge here is just going to make the polygon sizes more closer in size, which is just better overall. So a tricky part, though, is going to be getting a holding edge on the inside. I can do it 2 ways, and I'll show you one way. So if I use my insert edge loop tool, I'll put it here. But notice how it doesn't go all the way around because our topology, our ring of edges, right, they go up into here. So that's why this edge loop is following at the top. And if I hit 3, you can see, well, that's negatively holding this edge here. So if I use my insert edge loop tool, do it here, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I'm going to do it a different way probably, but I just want to show this way too. So what that does is it's kind of letting me control this better, but it's negatively impacting the roundness on top. So what I can do here is I can go to my vertex mode and I can use target weld, which is in my modeling toolkit. Snap these. So now I'm getting this nice polygon loop right here. I got to do the other side too. That's why it was wrapping around. So let's do this. Okay, and now I don't need these, so I can just hold shift and double click these. Hold shift, double click, hold shift, double click, control backspace, and now we get that nice loop. But that I do that occasionally, but for this object, I think it's going to be a little bit. I'm just undoing right now. I can just double click, control backspace. So for this example, though, I think what we can do is use a inset or a scaled in extrusion that's going to give us what we want. So I need to select the back and the front, or we could cut this in half. I think this is going to be fine. So I'll hit Control E for my extrude tool, hit a box, and grab this one, and I'll scale it in like this. And this is just a little bit easier. If you don't have a ton of polygons to select, it's super easy. And you can even, to make the selection process a little bit easier, switch from pick marquee to drag mode. So I'm in drag mode now, so I'll go to faces, and you can see you can select stuff pretty quick. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I want to hit 3. I think I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. If this was a personal project or for a client or work, I would do more to make sure that these polygon loops are kind of spaced out better. So what I mean by spaced out better is the distance from here to here, I'd want to make sure it's pretty consistent throughout. And this actually doesn't look too bad, but it gets a little bit thin, like right here, for example. So I gotta do the front and the back if I want to maintain. So yeah, something like that. That's actually pretty good. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So let's hit 3. Lastly, we need to kind of hold the bottom. So what we can do is I can use my insert edge loop tool, and I'm going to be really cheesy with this. I'd probably approach this slightly differently if it was for like a for real project. But you can see if I hit 3. Well, we can't 100% do that. So let's isolate this and let's just grab these and bring them down, because we are going to merge these together in ZBrush anyway, so kind of being cheesy with that. But you can see it's holding this corner now, so we're not getting this looping in on itself, which is nice. Okay, so for the circle, let's enable X-ray mode and let's go to our front orthographic. What I want to do is I want to build this circle, and I think it's going to be easy enough to show you guys. So if I select these polygons, all of the polygon faces that this circle basically encloses, you want to make sure you select. So what I'm going to do is hit Control E for my extrude tool, and I will scale it, and it could be any size because we're going to have to resize it. And in the past, what I'd have to do is make like a cylinder that has the number of sides that lines up with the number of vertices and snap them, or just manually eyeball and line it up and pray that smooth is going to make it a perfect circle, or get a plugin. But now, well, I say now, since 2018, Maya includes this function called circularize. So if I go to Edit Mesh, Circularize, it makes a circle. So it looks like, let me make sure I didn't select. Normally I can get better results. Let me hit Q to make sure I'm not in my extrude tool before I hit Circularize. It's still acting pretty bad. When I did this earlier, it wasn't quite so, wasn't quite that dramatic. So let's kind of do this maybe. I don't know why it's not giving me the result I would expect. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. Well, what we can do, normally this edge will stay straight up and down. So yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing that. Oh, do I have some settings kind of off maybe? Let's reset these settings. Nope, that didn't fix it either. All right, sorry about that. So what I'm going to do then is just manually kind of tweak this, which it's not too terrible. I'm just going to select these, go to my front orthographic view, and rotate it. And I can get it straight up and down. That's just weird that it was doing that. So let's scale this up a little bit. And I want this circle that we created to be a little bit bigger than my reference. Because I'm thinking about having a holding edge. And it'll make more sense once I do it. So let me just go ahead, Control E. Scale it in. So here you can see I'm just prepping the holding edge on the outside before I extrude the hole. Okay. So now I'm going to hit Control E. Bring it in. I think a depth of this is okay. I'm looking at my reference, and it's not too deep. It's kind of shallow. And then I'll hit Control E one more time, and hit the cube, grab the plane to scale it, and we get this. And I'm just going to hit I'm hoping it... There. This is what circularize should have looked like. So I hit circularize, and it just makes it a circle. So maybe I should have made sure this one was good. I think they are, though. Yeah, those ones are good. Okay. So now you can see I have my holding edges, and these corners are pretty soft. If we're chiseling stone, usually the corners are going to be kind of sharp, and we'd have to like sand it down to kind of decrease the sharpness, make the bevels nicer, so that if somebody's going to touch this or whatever, they don't slice their hand. But I am going for a more stylized look. And so I do want them to be a little bit softer, but I don't want them to be that soft. So I just threw in a couple of holding edges, and I think that's getting the result I am looking for. Maybe we could sharpen this edge a little bit more. And I think this is going to be good. Yeah, that's looking how I want to. Okay, so that's how we can use subdivision modeling techniques to kind of complete that. And this part of this gravestone is ready to go into ZBrush. And so now what I'm going to do is just quickly do the same kind of detailing, or excuse me, subdivision modeling on the kind of RIP sign and the base. And I am going to go a little bit more quickly since we kind of, the concepts are pretty much the same. What I want to do is I want to make a ridge that matches my reference, so something like this to give a little bit more interest to my shapes. What I can do is I can solo this and do a ring selection. I can use my connect function and set this to 3. And maybe change the pinch to something like 0.68. And basically, I'm thinking, is this going to be as thick as I want the, these kind of beams? They're not really beams. They're like the outer layer, I guess, of my gravestone. So I think that's good. So I changed the pitch to 0.68, hit enter. And I'll do the same for the top. I need the top, so let's use connect. 0.68. It's kind of bigger, so let's not use connect. I'm just gonna have to eyeball it anyway, so I'll use my insert edge loop tool. I just want this to be the same thickness from here to here, here to here. It does look a little bit thicker. So I need to slide this up and down, but since this is at an angle, you can see it's like just moving straight up and down. If you have your edges on an angled surface like this and you need to move it up or down, we have these things called transform constraints. So if I go to my modeling toolkit, transform constraints, I can turn on edge slide, and now you'll see that that edge slides up and down on that angle. So that's something that's super important, and it's a nice time saver. And then I'm just going to turn it off because I'll forget if I don't want it. I'll be like, why is it acting up? All right, so I think that's good. Let's go ahead and take this. I'll hit Control E and inset it in a little bit. And I'm probably going to be pretty sloppy with how I do the holding edges on here. So you can see smooth preview. This is what I get. Oh shoot, I forgot to clean this up. You know what? Let's go ahead and when we Dynamesh, it should fix this in ZBrush. Let's go ahead and delete this. If we wanted to, I mean, I can show you guys really quick how we can repair it, which might not be a bad idea. But it'd basically be throwing that edge loop there and using our bridge function. And then bridge and bridge. So this is how we could fix it. I think we could have left it, to be honest. There's a close hold feature in ZBrush too. But yeah, that's kind of quickly how you can do that. So let's kind of see that. So I know I need probably a holding edge here. Let's just go ahead and throw a support loop there as well. So we know that's doing good. We need to hold these corners. So easiest way to do that. And boxes are like kind of easy for holding edges and whatnot. Let's do one here, here, and here. And the reason why I'm doing that is because in my head, I know ZBrush like really wants every polygon to be the same size. So that way, when you subdivide it in ZBrush, you have the same kind of resolution no matter where you are on the mesh. So let me duplicate this and let me show you what I'm talking about. And let's just duplicate it one more time. And oops. Okay. So if I subdivide this like this and this like this, you can see how we have more resolution on this guy than we do this one. And so in ZBrush, you're doing a lot of subdivisions. So if I have this fine granular detail that I'm painting here that I want here in ZBrush, well, then that's why you'd want them to, the polygon sizes to be the same square. So you know, like, hey, these polygons are the same size at the top as well as in the front. So if I'm sculpting this fine detail, I know that subdivision level I'm in, it's going to translate no matter where I am on this object because the initial polygon sizes were the same. But on here, I'm going to be able to sculpt in finer resolution in the same subdivision on here. But right here, these polygons are way bigger, so I'm not going to be able to sculpt that same level of detail that I can on the top I won't be able to sculpt that same level of detail on the front that I can get on the top because I have more resolution to work with. And if that went over your head, that's okay. We'll see it in action when we get to ZBrush, but that's my thought process of why I threw in these kind of edges, because it's like, for game res asset, yeah, I wouldn't put these in, but right now I'm in the phase where I'm creating the high poly mesh. So I have to think about these things when going for that high resolution subdivision mesh that will eventually take down and control the polygon count. So now, that was kind of an aside. Sorry about that. So let's continue to add in our holding edges. I think that's a bit too soft. Let's do here. And you can see I really am just worried about how the corners are going to smooth. This is probably overkill, but that's okay. And then let's just check the sharpness that we're getting on here. So you can see even like here, these are a bit sharper than here. So maybe I did overdo it a bit. What if I take this middle guy out? Control backspace. I think that's a little bit better. It's still a little bit sharper than like these ones, but it's kind of the same sharpness we got going on here. And I am going to sculpt in weather detail, so I'm not as worried about it. So let's kind of get the same thing going on the base. Missing this one. I'm really being kind of naughty. Let me undo. I should be keeping things like symmetrical, and I'm just not really worried about it. So let's do this. Let's do 0.5. And if I activate symmetry in my X, my object X, there, I should have showed that sooner. But we can work with symmetry and not necessarily have to mirror stuff over. So here we might do symmetry in the Z. Oops, Y? Oh well. Not too concerned about the back anyway. Oh, before we do that though, let's use our connect function. There we go. Insert edge loop tool. And again, I don't want these to be super sharp. I definitely want them to be defined because it is stone, but you can still see how I have this nice kind of softness to it. And if this was realistic, maybe I'd make it sharper, but honestly, when you're doing hard surface modeling, things like guns and stuff, sometimes you'll model it a bit softer. The edges increases a bit softer, so they read better at a distance and they're interacting with the light a little bit nicer than just having like a super sharp edge, right? So even this is stylized, so I probably made this sharper than I might initially do it, but I think this is looking okay. So in the end, this is the topology that we have. It is smooth preview though, so really this is the topology that will bring in the ZBrush, and then we'll subdivide it, and we'll do that in the next video. So hopefully you guys found this helpful, and I will see you in the next video.